Thijs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Talissa. We're going to be starting off today the first of two series of webinars for the Greenpeace Fossil Free Revolution campaign. I'm delighted to be your host and your moderator today. We're going to perhaps wait a few seconds for folks to be able to jump into the live stream here on YouTube. And as we get started, we want to note that there will be an audio transcription available in the coming week. So we apologize if it isn't clear to follow everything that we say today, but it will be transcribed and made available later. And during this live stream, we will also be collecting comments and comments and questions from the audience. So if at any point you want to tune in to the conversation, engage with us, please feel free to do so in the chat. And we'll be happy to collect those questions and try to answer them at the end of our live stream here today. So as I said, my name is Talissa. I'm an organizer and trainer based in the Netherlands. And I am joined today by three amazing panelists. We're here to kickstart the Fossil Free Revolution campaign from Greenpeace. And this is a moment that we wanted to take before the official launch of the campaign itself, to learn from the groups and the people who are already doing some of the work that this campaign is going to be aimed at. Mostly the kind of confrontation and holding accountable of the fossil fuel industry, the toxifying of the systems of fossil capital, and the undermining and dismantling of the social license that gives the fossil fuel industry so much of its power. So these are the two pillars that are central to the Fossil Free Revolution campaign. So the direct confrontation and undermining of the social license. And so our three panelists that we're going to be talking with today are folks who are already doing this work in very diverse and amazing ways, from developing healthy food systems and urban green spaces to organizing lobbying commissions for just transitions for coal workers. We're going to be learning today about why fighting fossil fuels alone is not enough, why activism alone is not enough, and why we need communities that are rooted in care and in justice in order for us to build a true fossil fuel revolution. So we thank you for joining us today. Very happy to be here with our panelists. And I think we could just go ahead and get started because there's so much to talk about. So to get started, our first speaker and panelist for today is Samie Blasingame. She's a researcher, facilitator, and environmental justice activist based in Germany, with a background in policy research, sustainable agriculture, land security, and food sustenance. And Samie currently focuses on building resilient local food systems around Berlin. Welcome, Samie. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Hi, Talissa. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me. Yeah, as you said, my name is Samie Blasingame, and yeah, I'm a researcher, facilitator, and a couple other titles depending on the project and work that I'm doing. But yeah, and I came through this work, or to the work that I do, through studying environmental policy and working in that field for the last 5 or so years. And working on sustainable agriculture and land governance really got me into thinking more strongly about food and climate, and also sustainable consumption and really what that means to the average person and how we can kind of shift that conversation. I'm based in Berlin, Germany, and I host a monthly meetup called Food in the City that brings together folks active in the local food scene to discuss challenges and opportunities to collaborate and strengthen the local food system here. I also have a project called Food in My Kids, which aims to explore the local food system more by talking to people who are not often included in these conversations, the conversations around the future of food or food system transformation. And I'm also active in a couple local organizations. One is Green Buzz, and it is a sustainability, or it's a education and networking platform for the sustainability community of Berlin. I'm also part of Black Earth, which is a BIPOC environmental and climate justice collective that seeks to help shift the climate crisis conversation to be more intersectional and inclusive, and started really from a desire and necessity to have spaces where we didn't have to always explain the connection between colonialism, historical injustices, racism, and the climate crisis. And so we organized together and try to build alliances to strengthen that perspective here as well. Yeah.
Amazing. You wear so many hats and they're all so important and cool. Yeah, it's amazing. I think you mentioned a little bit about all these different things that you do around food systems, and today, obviously, we're here as part of this fossil-free revolution campaign, and people might be wondering, well, what is exactly the link between extractivism or fossil fuels and fossil capital and these global food systems and agriculture and these things that you work on? Could you tell us a little bit about these links? And yeah.
Definitely. So, I mean, the global food system as we see it and know it today is rooted very strongly in fossil fuels. Fossil fuels in the form of synthetic fertilizers and agrochemicals, which, you know, the so-called Green Revolution was, on one hand, successful in feeding much more people, but it has also ended up giving us this very limited food system that is really more geared towards profit and a few companies than it is the health of people and planet. And so we have this global food system that is not only not nutritious and sustainable for us and the planet, but also tends to hinder and suppress the local production of alternatives and the ability for people in different parts of the world to have a good livelihood. So yeah, it's just very intertwined, and it's rooted in fossil fuel production. And something I've been consciously like talking about or thinking a lot about lately is the potential that the food system has to diversify and provide biodiversity. And I thought about this recently when I heard of this 30 by 30 campaign, where the UK and other states are getting together to protect 30% of nature by 2030. And when I first read that, I was like, but it seems like a low-hanging fruit to go after conservation in this way. And there's already criticisms of this initiative because it's not including people like local people, indigenous communities in that process. And I wish instead that we would think about innovating within the food system, for example, and find all the potential for biodiversity there. At the moment, we have like 75% of loss in crop diversity, and I'm really into thinking about how we can reverse that at the moment. And so that has to do with, for example, seed saving initiatives or food sovereignty groups who are fighting the fact that 4 agrochemical companies are directing more than 60% of global seed um, accessibility. And so, you know, that sort of thinking and that paradigm is what's also pushing the narrative of how we're going to feed the world right now. We talk about that there's going to be 9 billion people and how are we going to feed them? But not only are we not focusing enough on the two big issues of plant-based eating and food waste, we're also not talking about, just the potential that there is to shift things and have more local production of native crops that are in the end more nutritious and better for the environment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for laying that out. It also makes me think of right now when you're talking about uh, how do we feed the world, that often I hear within the climate movement, such a strong focus on veganism, um, that often isn't very critical of where are these products actually coming from. Like I live in the Netherlands, and we don't get avocados year round. So how are we getting those here also? And we're not being critical of like this whole system that is even behind biological or vegan based food. And there's so much innovation, and there's so much more we could be doing. So that's super interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some of the ways that you personally, I guess, work on these issues, by building up local food systems and things like seed saving and stuff. Could you say a little bit more about that, about how it is that you deal with these links?
Yeah, I personally I'm driven by a desire to bring folks together and facilitate these conversations that are helping us imagine what is possible. And so that's kind of what I do as a facilitator and researcher and the things that I do. But it's always about bringing in this conversation of who's doing what. And um, so yeah, I do support and believe in seed saving movements and food sovereignty movements, and I'm part of them in different ways. But my work is really about driving these conversations and bringing in the average folk that aren't necessarily talking about this already. Like I'm really interested in seeing how we can bring everyone along, and so that's what I focus on, is these kind of conversations and who those conversations are including. Um, yeah, yeah. hmm
And in your experience, right now, who do you see those conversations including, and who do you see is not being included in those conversations around transitioning food systems, sustainable agriculture, and stuff?
Yeah, I think there's lots of community groups that are doing great things, but the mainstream conversations are really about this tech-driven um, transformations, like food alternatives, which are very important. But also, how are we also shifting like people's habits and traditions and the way that they connect to food while we're also coming up with all of these new alternatives. Um, so yeah, they're like startup techie folks, but what about just, the families around the corner who cook the same all the time or are struggling with different issues that maybe they're not even thinking of these yet? How are we communicating with those people, and how are we making sure that a transition also includes them, is kind of where my focus is. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's such important work. I just want to sit in one of your sessions and your workshops one time.
You're
Um,
welcome. You're super welcome to.
Great. This what you're explaining now, like how do we bring along folks that maybe aren't included in the conversation? How do we think about who's not having a seat at the table, or a voice in the discussion?
Mhm.
Um, and how do we expand how we see these issues just from being around, I don't know, agriculture, and then here's a tech solution, to really thinking beyond that, thinking about culture, thinking about our communities, how we live together as families, as neighborhoods, and things like that. um, this all kind of makes me think about I don't want to like slap this term on there, but I think you have some curious thoughts about this. But the kind of ways that we do intersectional organizing, right, is
Mhm.
asking who's missing from the conversation, who's most impacted that maybe isn't here, who are we not seeing, how do we make sure that we're addressing the complexity of these issues in all these different ways. And I think this is something that's starting to become more prevalent. We see it more in movement. Everybody's dropping this term intersectionality and all of that. And we're an intersectional, I don't know, group or whatever. And I'm curious of your thoughts on this, and what that actual intersectional organizing looks like to you in practice. even if that's not what you call it. Very, very curious about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. So yeah, I also agree that these terms are being thrown around, and yeah, that's just what happens when they become popular. No, they sometimes get a little whitewashed, maybe. um, but yeah, I've been thinking about this lately because I even saw a conversation with someone from Greenpeace actually about intersectionality, and it was connected to the idea of groups being brought together, like for a demo. And I just was thinking, okay, but there's a difference between an intersection of ideas and objectives and intersectional thinking. So one is bringing folks together around a common cause, which sees our objectives and our desires intersecting in a way that's powerful. But the other is intersectionality, which was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and meant to highlight an individual's intersections of oppressions. And so um, yeah, and when that term was introduced, it was specifically for the intersection of gender and race, right? And the way that Black women specifically felt a certain degree of oppression that was different than their white women and different from their male white counterparts. So intersectionality then is in practice for me is really about highlighting the privileges that we all have in some way, shape, or form, and then being active and consistent about ensuring that we're not replicating the impressions that our privileges allow for in a society that is still very much dominated by capitalism, patriarchy, and so forth, right? So how are we not replicating the oppressions that our privileges afford? Is one step to putting intersectionality in practice. Um, and it's also, I've noticed, just very, very slow organizing, because you need to take the time to know who these people are and their different experiences, who are coming to the table that you're organizing with, or people that you want to build an alliance with. Um, you can never know until you take the time to really talk to folks about what their experiences have led them to this moment. So that's, yeah, some of the ways that I would say. I also try to bring justice into whatever work that I'm doing, and especially with groups like Black Earth, for example, like the questions that we're asking is whose communities are being sacrificed for whom? Because especially when you're talking about these new tech solutions, or when people say that everything's going to be electric, for example, the conversation still is not including where the resources to make that happen are going to come from. And it will be communities that don't have the power to fight back as much as others. And so, yeah, we really want to be conscious about knowing supply chains and knowing the consequences of certain decisions over another. And yeah, I think maybe that seems abstract to people, but like going away from the idea of intersectionality, but for me, that's all entwined in it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I would very much agree. Around these two things of um, the necessity of slow organizing, right, and taking the time to actually understand where people are coming from, and not calling something intersectional just because you got a bunch of different groups together to come for a demo or something like that. Is actually understanding what are these groups fighting, um, and how do we really connect with their issues, and align our objectives, our goals, and
Yeah.
also this like holding ourselves accountable, I think, is a super key point to it as well.
Holding ourselves accountable, and also like the idea that if you're truly doing intersectional work, you're probably going to be supporting the person or groups of people who face the most oppression, because those are the people who need to be yeah, championed around, I guess, and like making sure that they're okay lifts the
Mhm,
tide of all boats, that kind of saying, you know? So if you're
mhm,
doing intersectional work, it should be including the most marginalized, because then we all win.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, great. I think we could go on about that for so long, and perhaps once we open up the panel for all three of the panelists, we can jump into that a little bit more. But thank you very much, Sammy. I'm going to shift over now, actually, to our second speaker, who really, I think what we're going to talk about is going to really build on what Sammy and I were just talking about. So our second speaker, I'd like to welcome Teïssir Ghrab from Alternatiba Paris. And Teïssir is an activist and spokesperson. She has, in the past, for her master's, researched the link between mining activities and indigenous people in the Arctic. And from that, kind of gained the determination to work more actively with citizen mobilization campaigns in France, with a particular interest around environmental racism and inclusivity in the French climate movement. So thank you so much for joining us, Teïssir.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So happy to be here.
We're so happy that you joined. So could you, I know I just gave a little intro, but could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work of Alternatiba Paris?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a climate activist just from 2 years ago, which is a French citizen mobilization organization. So I joined Alternatiba just after my master's degree in the Arctic, as you said, because I was really shocked by the impact of climate change in this region, and because also I had the testimony of people living there and just facing every day those impacts. So yeah, I became globally interested in climate issue just 2 years ago, because honestly, I've never felt that it was something that could affect my life or people of color, because nobody ever told me it was connected, never before, especially in French. So I had this idea that the climate movement was something for wealthy people that have time to think about those issues, while we were just facing poverty and precariousness and just like not being killed by the police. So it was something really far from me, from my life. But then I just realized that in my own community, people with low income, people of color, were affected by the implementation of industries, by air pollution, by the lack of green spaces, and also how our ability to reclaim public space in those neighborhoods has been taken away from us for a very long time. And it was also mixed with the testimony from my grandfather, who immigrated in Paris, like I don't remember, 30 years ago, and no, more, sorry, 50 years ago at least. So it was just a big shift in my life. And first, when I joined Alternatiba, I was not really convinced. I was like, okay, I'll just try and see where it goes. And which is very nice with this organization is that you're really getting responsibilities really fast. And you are your own voice, so you can speak about your issues and just get those issues into the movement and just create a new dynamic with other people. It's not really vertical, it's not a vertical organization. So it's really nice, and this get me really empowered about my story and my life, and how I want to just like Sammy said, who's missing from the conversation. And we were missing actually in the climate movements. It's really white, it's really like people with who've been studying a lot, so it's not really diverse. And so I just saw this kind of thing missing, and I just wanted to be this voice to just say people are missing, so let's get to them.
Yeah, and thank you for for doing that super important work. Also, I think it's you've already touched on a lot of things that that I think we talked about before, and yeah, this question of like who's missing, right? And I was wondering if you could say also a little bit about what kind of work Alternatiba does specifically, because you mentioned it's a mobilization, a citizen mobilization organization. So what does that actually mean? What do you do with that?
Yeah. So what we do is we organize all the climate march from 2018. So we are just like just volunteers. Actually, there's not much we paid people, so it's a majority of volunteers. So we organize big strikes. We also have also organize civil disobedience actions. And we are working closely with the Friend of Earth Friends, which is a old organization who is just doing campaigns around, overproduction, banks, fossil fuels, and all those things. So we are working with them because we like to say that we are the sort of soldiers and the Friend of Earth soldiers, So they're just doing this kind of lobby. They are lobbying, and then we are actually in the streets doing some civil disobedience to shift to have more power and put pressure on institution and the government.
Mm-hmm.
And we also train other collectives to civil disobedience too.
Cool, very cool. So it's really a mix of civil disobedience, of like mass awareness building through demos, of working with groups that are doing lobbying, of getting in the street and kicking some ass. Sounds great. This is really good. And one of the reasons why we had, out of many, of why we wanted to invite you and someone from Alternatiba was because of the kind of narrative that your group has around linking the climate crisis with like environmental or environmental racism, and with working class issues. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, about what is this link between fossil fuels and fossil capital, and this concept that's called environmental racism. Maybe you could also say how you define that for people who aren't familiar with that term, and with working class issues, how do all of these things intersect?
Yeah, wow, big question. So I'm not really an expert, so I'm just really talking about my vision and what I see and what I feel like it is. So not really an expert about that, but I think when I told you that I was not really concerned about climate issues, but then I just kind of reflect about that, and I realized that the connection was pretty much clear. It's like it's a system of domination and oppression that thinks that it can do anything, and which is almost encouraged by our leaders and our governments, while themselves part of this system. So we really think that this system is like, I just don't want to be just negative and say that we're just fighting the system, but we also kind of want to propose some alternatives. But once we said that, what do we do? Like, okay, we have a system of domination and oppression to fight, but this system also have like things that we want to avoid, and we don't want to fall into the trap of this kind of ecology of the rich, meaning the one that would like to fight against climate change, by continuing to live in their comfort and privileges, and by excluding the poorest and people of color through laws that will just increase their precariousness. So, and we saw that this is something happening actually. We saw that with the yellow vests strike in demonstrations in France 2 years ago, because they wanted to tax people. It was a carbon tax, and it was a tax that will just for the climate transition, but it was just to tax poor people. Actually, it was not. It was just like anti-climate justice, you know. So it is this system that we question at Alternatiba, and against which we fight to propose alternatives, but alternatives that will never leave anyone aside. And this is like so important because we need to include everyone in this process. So also there is this ecology that wants to, you know, that defends, we don't want to defend the speech of individual gestures like recycling, consuming less plastics, etc. Although obviously, don't get me wrong, it's really, really important, but it's not our point of view, because we need those kind of conscious. But this speech is often used by the power to make people feel guilty and to unload all the responsibility of climate change on citizens, and to just avoid asking the right questions and to force real polluters to act on climate. So this is something that we want to avoid also. And we want to make accountable our leaders and polluting companies, and they are required to act at their level, you know, the level of a president, the level of a minister, the level of a CEO. And this is what we do. We just don't want to be an environmental organization just doing this, you know, yeah, just fight for climate, recycle, and you know, just buy wood straw or something like that, and it will all going to be fine, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I hear a lot of what you're saying, and also this like tricky balance of wanting to fight the system and like going against something, but also needing to be actively building the alternatives, the communities, the things that we need to actually that we do want, right? Because there needs to be a balance in that. Yeah, I think maybe I'll come back to that later when we do the questions with all the panelists. But one of the questions I also had was how do you and Alternatiba, like how do you work to unite these kind of working class and environmental movements? Because you just mentioned the yellow vests, and in our conversation before, you also mentioned some examples of that. So could you say a bit more about how you actually work to build that bridge between the environmental groups and actually call them also into that struggle for working class and anti-racism issues?
Yeah, so for the question about the working class, I have two examples about that. We are carrying out two campaigns at the moment, which illustrate really well those rather improbable alliances that we've been creating. The first one is the campaign against that we are leading with the Friends of Earth Friends. So it's a campaign against the establishment of Amazon warehouses in France. So these warehouses are killing the small business in France, especially with the COVID crisis, and it creates a lot of unemployment in France. And obviously, in addition to the aberrant climatic impact of Amazon, which say without saying. So we have created alliance with federations of small businesses in France, who are rather right-wing organization. But the key is really to find a common cause and not get into a sort of ideological war just on principle, because we have a powerful enemy, which in this case is Amazon. And if we can't join forces to bring him down, that there is just no point in fighting, you know. So we have a very pragmatic approach on this subject. But of course, there are limits with this kind of alliance, especially with people who do not necessarily have the same values as us. But the pragmatic approach allows us to have victories and to influence also a fringe of the society, which did not feel concerned by the climatic issue, for instance, but once it just, they have been impacted by Amazon in their life, so now they have to just realize also the climate impact of Amazon. And you know, we all know this sort of hate this dogma, but this imperialist dogma, divide and rule, because you know, just divide and rule, and because union and, you know, unity is scary for people in positions of powers, you know. And I think I have another example which is also really great, is the Greenpeace oil refiners in France. I think I have a photo, just if you want to show it. So the story is that Total, which is a major oil major in France, wants to carry out a project to transform the refinery into a zero oil platform. But the activities proposed by Total to replace refining at Greenpeace are neither viable in the face of the ecological crisis, nor fair to the workers. So Total is just going to fire them anyhow, and which is really like gets me angry. They just going to fire them in the name of, you know, ecological transition. So it's just not okay. So, you know, they came to us and they say, well, we have that. We know that our jobs are no longer viable, and we want to participate into this, you know, ecological transition right now. But we want to just, you know, change our work and work into something else, but they're just going to fire us. So we can't even do that, but we want to participate into something else. And it said that one of the spokesperson of those workers said there can't be any ecological transition without the workers, and we are doing this work because we are we can't do anything else in this region. It's the only work available in this region, you know. So they don't do this work for passion. Sorry, they're doing that because they need this job. So this is actually the center of what we mean when we talk about climate justice and social justice. So what we did is that we gave them our support, and we trained them in civil disobedience, and we organized with them a blockade of Total's headquarters in Paris. So I think it's the photo that you just show. So yeah, we have to work with working class people, especially because they are also the missing person at the table.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those examples. There's a few things that I heard you say, particularly just around like needing to do this like again slow alliance building, but it also raises a question for me that maybe we could talk about with the whole panel later, around what it means to build those strategic alliances without reproducing the harm that perhaps privileges or that those alliances might bring into the spaces that we organize in. So I think that's also something interesting to talk about. And perhaps one last question before we move on to our final panelists, is that one of the protests that Alternatiba organized last year that really kind of struck out to me also, because I saw it from being here in the Netherlands, was that you guys worked with Justice pour Adama and collaborated on a march on that. And so could you talk about that, and could you also talk about perhaps the impact that the entire, I think all of 2020 was an uprising. I mean, I think all of the last 10 years have been uprisings if you've been paying attention. But the kind of peaking of this like global Black Lives Matter movement last year, which is still peaking, but anyways, you know, that and how that has impacted the work that Alternatiba does, thinking about this specific example about the Justice for Adama.
Yeah, just maybe a reminder of the story of Adama Traoré death. So Adama was killed in 2016 by policemen following an arrest and because of a belly tackle. I don't know if we say it like that in English, but it was the same technique that was used in the case of George Floyd in the United States. So after his death, there was just her sister, Assa Traoré, was really is struggling to get the truth and is struggling with with justice now. And you know, it was a big turning point for the collective in 2020 because actually the Black Lives Matters movement gave the opportunity in France, especially to, and in other countries, obviously, it gave the opportunity to victims of police brutality to speak out and shed light on injustice and violence that they have been experienced for more than 30 years in France, actually. So it's a really old story, you know, and we're just getting into it now in France because, you know, France is just not assuming its colonial past yet. So, you know, still have some consequences now. So in parallel, you also have the climate movement that has imposed itself in the political and media arena since I'll say 2018. So in the day, like 1 month before Adama commemoration march, they came to us to say we want you to be with us to create an alliance with us, but we have already made contact in 2019 with them. So you know, it just, Sammy, you said that and it just like was really striking to me because it was slow. It was a really deep alliance because it took so much time, you know, to build trust, and it's still the case now. We just it's not easy, just not that okay, hi, can you join us for this commemoration? No, it was like still now we still have we are still struggling in this relation because obviously we have not maybe, I mean, I said we, but I'm speaking in the name of Alternatiba because I feel like I'm both. So we just know that as a climate movement, we have privileges, and we know that we can't just say that we are with them and just, you know, sorry, I'm just lost here. Yeah, there is this debate that we have, especially in the activist world in French, which is the debate between convergence and alliances. And it's I think it's an old activism debate, but it's so much different, because when you say that you want to converge all the struggles, all the fights, you just like making invisible other people, and especially people of color. If you want, like, if the climate movement was saying, okay, we want to join you, but we are just getting all the lights, it's not okay. You know what I mean? It's we had to have a balance between giving force, giving our strength to their movement, to their mobilization. So it was really like something that we had in mind. But we obviously, so they came to us and they say, we want us to, you know, build a common message. And this message was, we want to breathe, on veut respirer. And because this message was rather simple, but it was really powerful, because it was saying that we want to breathe in our, communities with people of color, with people with low income. We want to breathe in those neighborhoods where racialized youth are harassed by the police daily, where the neighbors are enclosed with no access to green spaces, you know, of what I was saying before, where people are the first victims of pollutions, of air pollution in large French cities. So, and it was also saying that whether or not you are a victim of violence or oppression, it's so vital and essential that we collectively oppose to it, but not just saying that we have the same, you know, we are facing the same danger, but saying that people are more exposed to violence and police brutality and systemic racism, and we are just here to help them getting through that, and to help them build another society where there will be more inclusive society. So, you know, I just this message, and it was a real turning point for us, because we receive a lot of insults, criticism, and from people inside of the climate movement itself, you know. So it was like, okay, so it was for the better, actually. And it was, you know, we always, like, it allows us to be clear on the vision of society that we are building, you know, and the society that we want and for which we fight. So I just can't imagine a sustainable society that has succeeded in curbing the climate change, maybe one day, but continues to discriminate against and kill people because of their, you know, skin color, all their social condition. Is not something that I want, and this is not my dream, actually. So we need to build that first, and then maybe, you know, fight against climate change.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally resonate with that feeling that we can't just be fighting for clean air and clean water and sustainability and solar panels if that means that, like, our kin and our communities are still, you know, being attacked and are still under threat and are still being killed and all of these things. We just I think this is why intersectionality, thinking about what the individual oppressions in an individual's life, what that means for them. This is why it's so important that we center people of color in our movements, and we allow them to speak, because we can speak to what it means to be facing that threat and that violence, and also you know, wanting to have green urban spaces and wanting to have renewable energy. You know, I think that's so important. Thank you so much for sharing that. And on that note, I'm gonna shift over to our last panelist, and then we're going to open up the panel for everyone. So thank you so much, Teïssir. And I'd like to welcome into the conversation our last panelist, which is Veronika Dombrovská from I'm going to butcher this, from Limity, jsme. You're going to have to repeat this because I always mess that up. But from We Are the Limits in Czech Republic, which is a really amazing climate justice movement centered in the northern Bohemia mining regions of the Czech Republic, fighting for a coal phase out using direct action as well as educative and mobilizing activities. So welcome, Veronika. We're so happy to have you here. So I will allow you to introduce Limity, and to say it correctly, please correct me.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and also like it's already a super interesting discussion about what's happening in other places. So the movement's name is Limity, jsme, but we can also just say Limity for shorter and more understandable version. Yeah, and so the introduction is that there are some region, especially this like northern Bohemia in the Czech Republic, where many villages were already destroyed because of lignite and brown coal, like reserve of coal, which were under the villages, and that happened back in like the 80s. And then there were like some limits set up, so no more villages will be destroyed for brown coal. But in 2015, the government, after like 25 years, decided to actually reopen this question and maybe destroy some villages again. And that was actually the impulse for this movement to emerge. And to start to the movement is actually kind of decentralized, so there are like many people from all over the country, but we started cooperating with some local initiatives from the northern Bohemia region. And after doing some demonstrations and partly winning this political fight of whether there are gonna be more villages destroyed, which they are not so far, hopefully for good, we kind of reform into a movement for climate justice, not only like for local issue, but to have some broader context of it. And that was actually, I guess, the first opening of the topic of climate justice in the Czech Republic. And yeah, and so then we started to be more like a big open movement, and started to do climate camps and direct actions, and especially mass direct actions. So a bunch of times during that climate camps, hundreds of people would occupy a coal mine or entrance to a power plant. And I think we kind of like, managed to bring some like media attention to this question of the climate and how it's actually connected with coal, which is, not actually, or it wasn't actually a topic at all in the Czech Republic. So that's nice, but I think that the most important thing about this mass direct actions was that it somehow emancipated people, mostly young people, I have to say, to actually realize that this is the power, like we can organize ourselves and do something together. And I think it really changed way of thinking of many people, and me personally as well, because I didn't do any direct action before. So I think that is the biggest success, maybe, that we kind of like mobilize people and empower some people that they can now actually do something and don't only wait of what's gonna happen, what the politicians are gonna decide, especially in this country where but probably is like in most countries, the politicians and the coal or fossil industry lobby is somehow connected. So yeah, I can also say what we were doing last year, because that was kind of a hype, because that last year the government was supposed to finally actually decide, as all the other countries in Europe already did, about the final year when they will be stopping coal extraction and using coal for making energy. And because of that, there were many actions actually, since there was also the coronavirus, but on the other hand, there's like even more actions than in the usual years. First of all, the government started official coal committee that was supposed to decide or recommend the perfect year for quitting coal. But as they only invited mostly like coal lobbyists and politicians, we started alternative coal committee. And we invited their people who actually live in the mining regions. So it's really like their biggest interest. And also we invited some climatologists, sociologists, and just people who can kind of make maybe better picture of what's going to happen and how to actually do the just transition, and not having this argument of like, yeah, we can't really do it without coal, so we just have to keep burning coal forever. And that's our scientific opinion. And another thing that happened was that we organized this cycling tour around these mining regions, which at the end was attended by tens of people who were just like cycling from one town to another, and then having some kind of workshops and discussions with the local people to actually realize what is their idea about the just transition, or like what are their needs, what's supposed to happen with the region, what should be in the future. So to kind of start some relationships with that, and also let their voices to be heard a bit more. And yeah, that's, I think, enough for introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much, Veronika. I think you started to already touch on a few of the questions that I had, and also there was a question in the live stream from someone in the audience around whether people's work was impacted during the COVID period, and so you're already saying a little bit about that. And I mean, so much of what you said, I think, resonates with this idea again that Sammy brought up in the beginning about this like slow organizing and this kind of really building alliances. And how have you felt in your experience? How's that been to try and build those alliances with the communities that are actually in the villages, on the front line of these extraction projects, and how has that been, and has there been challenges in doing that as well?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, actually, it's a very difficult topic, and it's very difficult because I guess maybe most of us have similar experience of this, let's say, activist culture, where we are trying to avoid all the like oppressions and to work in non-hierarchical ways, and just we have some values, etc. While on the other hand, people who are living in these mining regions, which are very like peripheries, and are having totally different problems. So sometimes they are actually the voters of far-right parties, for example, or just like have totally different values, and also the culture of work and of heavy work, and people are even like inheriting the works, like the kids are taught what their fathers are doing, and they are slowly preparing on having this career, and that's also like regionally somehow like connected, like this mining or industry. I'm actually coming from very like industrial and mining region as well, and it's totally intertwined with the culture, and there are like festivals about like industrial jobs, etc. So it's actually really difficult to start to talk about that these all things should be gone because of the climate justice, or because of the climate, but also that people from here can't really see so far how devastated the planet is already for some years or some decades in some other places. So yeah, it's very complicated, and I think the most important thing is to like develop some language, and maybe language is not the best word, but also some like visual way how to communicate that, so people would actually understand that they are part of something bigger. But the other important thing is to actually find out the way how these regions can flourish, and how can they live, you know, their normal lives with their families and have some decent jobs, etc., and not be so dependent just on this like heavy industry and on mining. And that's something that is very systematic problem, and it must be solved in a like structural way. And very often it seems that the people don't have the power to do something themselves, and then they are like their destiny is like in the hands of politicians who are really strongly like lobbying for or lobbied for the coal industry to continue. So that's yeah, so far it's very hard, but I think, as you said, it's a long-term process, and it must be building up. But I think also through this alternative commission and through these actions that were already happening, we are somehow getting better and understanding, or just like knowing each other. And yeah, hopefully it will have some positive outcome at the end, and we will all connect.
Yeah, that's the big hope, right? That we that at some point we connect before it's all too late, or even more late than it already is. Yeah, and you mentioned briefly that kind of as a result of the corona crisis and also other things that the collective has decided to almost shift a bit from doing direct action to doing, for example, the coal commission that you talked about. And I was wondering if you could say actually a little bit about, since this happened during a global pandemic, which has also exposed so many other crises, including health crises. I think we talked about this a little bit before, but this link between extractivism and health or healthcare, and how we need to be thinking about that when we talk about a just transition. Like, part of it is the workers and how we transition them out, and part of it is also thinking about this aspect of health, right? So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I think there's a lot of similar things, and also not everything is the same, but with the coronavirus and with the climate change, that it just multiplies or emphasizes the people who are already oppressed, or peripheried, or like they are on the periphery, or like, for example, people don't have such a good they can't oh sorry, how do you say that, they don't live so close to hospitals. There are not so many hospitals in some places, or like all these medical cares. Also, some people have more jobs that are not like so for sure, like some kind of contracts, and like all these kind of like people who are already on the edge with their finance and with some like things in their lives, living standards and all these things. And now it's just like all very exposed during the pandemic. And the fact is, like a general fact is, that the more polluted air you live in, the more the more people have some lung diseases, and the more lung diseases you have, the more likely you're gonna have coronavirus, or like harder or more difficult like symptoms. And yeah, it's just not so easy to go through it. So in general, like the more industry you have somewhere, the more exposed you actually are during the coronavirus. And the most terrible thing in the Czech Republic is that regardless that the healthcare system is totally falling apart, the doctors are like working without any break for so many months, and the nurses and all these people are just, yeah, it's a really like catastrophe. I think Czech Republic is now like best in COVID in the worst possible way. And the industry is still going on. everything has stopped. Children are not going to school. Totally everything except big supermarkets is closed for like months. Yeah, the industry is still going on, so we just like can't stop working the most actually the most polluting jobs. So yeah, that's a big structural injustice which is still going on, and I hope that more and more people are now like seeing it somehow visibly. And also the regions that are already like on the periphery and where the mining are somehow maybe not taken as so important. And also at least like 2 months ago, that was like the biggest outbreak in this northwestern Bohemia. There was one city which was the first city or first town that was totally closed. So yeah, I think this is all connected. But if I can talk more about this kind of maybe transition or some transformation that we are going through because of the pandemic, it's like, since everything started to or had to be closed and people can't really meet, not even outside, and all these things, first we really learn how to do a lot of things online, which is partly good but also have a lot of disadvantages. But during this or I mean just when this began, and some people actually then had like more time maybe, we also started to communicate with like farmers, because also the climate change is actually like physical. Even in the Czech Republic there are terrible droughts, so people can't even plant seeds. It's really like problematic, especially because another problem in the Czech Republic is that all the agricultural like enterprises are like really huge and also owned by the prime minister, and small farmers have it really difficult to like get money. And now with the climate change, when they are doing organic agriculture, it's very complicated for them. So we wanted to also help these people and somehow hear the stories to even like, you know, be able to explain like the climate change is actually real in the Czech Republic. And from like this activity, we also started to do like all this, what I was saying, like climate cycling tour and all these things. And then just before the government was supposed to decide about the final year of, we were basically like blocking 3 different governmental buildings for a couple of weeks in a row. And then we realized like, yeah, it's actually Corona, and we actually said that we will have kind of a break on like focusing on our internal things, how to, you know, somehow like reorganize what we do to do things in a better way and like prepare when everything is open again. And instead we were just doing like so many things that, yeah, now we finally decide to actually get some time for focusing or maybe like sustainable activism a bit more. And also somehow it seems that the final year of coal is already gonna be pronounced by the government, and but the Corona is just not really going to end very soon. So that also brought us a bit more to thinking of dating maybe a bit broader social topics, or like how is the just transition actually gonna look like? Is it actually gonna be just? Are we gonna actually talk with the people who are included, or is it just gonna be some decision made by the top politicians who in the Czech Republic, I mean, most of the government are people who actually own some businesses that are like related and can, I don't know, for example, get all money from, I don't know, EU just transition fund and just not give it to the actual people, or, you know. So that's what we're going through now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think it like brings us full circle right back to where Sammy started talking about food systems, you know, and the kind of the complexity and interconnectedness of all of these things that we're talking about. So thank you for sharing that. And I think on that note, I actually would like to open it up for the whole panel, because I see lots of connections between the things that y'all have said, and I'm sure you do as well. And yeah, I just want to open it up and and see if anybody wants to respond to things that other folks said, or whether you want to say something about how, how all of these different issues, from pollution to local food systems to healthcare to labor and work, how all of these things are connected to this monster that is the fossil fuel industry. I'll open it up for anyone who wants to take a stab at that.
I can go first, I guess. Just one of the things that was on my mind in terms of similarities across our work is I think everyone mentioned some sort of kind of utopia or like vision, like looking for the visions and like putting forth alternatives to what we're seeing now. And I think that's really important for the work that we're all doing, that we have this sort of vision to work towards. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of all the different ways that people can identify and the different, struggles that people are facing. Yeah, I think it was Teïssir that mentioned the ecology of the rich, and I can't remember exactly what that was, but I wrote it down as something that I was like, yeah, like this idea of like, I also mentioned that in my work a lot, like, are you ready to give up some of the comforts that this extractivism and capitalism affords us? Because especially with the people in my community, I live in Germany, like that's gonna have to happen. And are we ready to really talk about what it means to give up some of our comforts in order to really usher in a just transition?
Yeah, I guess I can jump on that. I'd just like to say that I really think that the real utopians in this story is the people thinking that we can just go on like that, you know. They are dreaming, actually, and we are the real pragmatics in this story, you know. And just saying that in terms of access also to healthy foods, we saw that in some communities here in Paris, that, you know, getting something biological without any pesticides, it's really expensive, you know. And this is what I mean when I'm talking about the ecology of the rich, is that to get something healthy, to get something that will never affect your health, you have to pay a price that it's just too much. And this is not okay. And we are all working on that. And I think it's so great to have this talk also. And I just have another story, but maybe we can talk about that later, about hospitals and some of also another alliance that we made with caregivers, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. I actually have a question around alliances, but maybe just want to check if Veronika, if you also have any thoughts or any comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of already started, but I think we should be really careful about this this individual responsibility. And on one hand, I totally understand that we should really like give up a bit of comforts that are here today, but I wouldn't maybe say give up comforts, but more like find some other things. Like, for example, we can spend less time with technology while actually spending more time, you know, just being with people, working on a relationship with other people, and working on relationship with non-human nature, animals, and gardening, and like all these things. But yeah, like I think this individual responsibility is the perfect narrative from the companies who either want to sell something green or who just want to keep like running this capitalist system. And I think before we get into really disparity of whether we can actually spend all our money for buying organic food, or whether we will just buy whatever is cheapest to actually just eat something and then like keep changing the system like structurally, then I think we should always choose fighting for the better system, because and just like not really, accept this kind of game, that it's like individual responsibility, because like the biggest responsibility I think is still the industry, the traffic, like all these huge emitters which are having way bigger ecological footprint than like any individual, unless it's like super rich person with 2 helicopters. So yeah, sorry.
Sammy, I see you. I see you wanting to respond. You want to respond to that?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. Yeah, and when I just wanted to respond that when I say giving up comforts, I definitely don't want to make the point of individual responsibility is more important than systemic change, right? But systemic change will mean that some of the comforts that people in the Western world enjoy may change. And I totally agree with then needing to provide alternatives that are just as enjoyable, because we don't need all these things that capitalism has told us that we do, right? But a lot of people are comfortable with that. And so bringing those people into the conversation, bringing everyone into the conversation of what a more enjoyable and worthwhile maybe life could look like, is just as important. And that doesn't leave the responsibility just on individuals, but it acknowledges that the individual role within this systemic change that we must encompass, if that makes sense. I was just listening to a podcast today debating that individual choice versus systemic change, and they debated both sides as equally as they could. But ultimately, yeah, it's more systemic. In my view, it's more systemic, but we have to make personal changes in between that as well.
We want the name of the podcast, Sammy.
It's how to save the planet or something. It's a new one, actually.
Great, thanks. We'll have to check it out. Yeah, and something you just said, Sammy, about how do we bring everyone into the conversation. I think this is something that I also heard in all of the things that the three of you said was about, who's missing? How do we get them, not just a seat at the table, but basically like hand our microphone to them and let them speak for themselves, and sometimes also go into dialogue. And it makes me think about what came up earlier also. Teïssir, you mentioned about this kind of strategic alliance building. And so perhaps a question for the three of you, because you all in different ways, I think, have talked about difficulty in or the challenges of sometimes doing that alliance building when it's with groups or with communities that don't have the same values you have. I'm curious, how do you do that? How do you build those strategic alliances without just accepting everyone? Like I was once at a climate camp and overheard someone saying that, well, if the Nazis wanted to join us right now, they should join us. And I was like, ooh, we maybe should not be opening the door that wide. So I'm curious, like, how do you do that strategic alliance building without, just opening the door and letting in everyone? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think that Nazis will ever come to our door and say that they want to fight with us. So, it's true that, we are obviously left-wing organization, like it's writing in our faces that we are left-wing, but saying that it's all about honesty and communications during the conversation, because you know, when I talked about the confederation of small businesses that are right-wing, people are said that we know that they will never come and you know, march for against climate change or doing a climate strike or something like that. But it's more about, like I said, the common cause that we have and the common enemy. And because enemies is, you know, if you are the enemy of my enemy, then, you know, you're my friend. So it's more like that. And obviously we have set limits to those kind of islands. We can't never, ever, ever be with people who have racist speeches, who are rather really far right people. This is something that we do not share, and we don't want even to talk with these people, you know. So it's okay to have some debates about some techniques, about some strategies, about violence or non-violence, you know, those kind of thing. It's okay, but we need to be clear about our vision, our values, and then, you know, it just getting, you know, I mean, if you have your values straight and you know where you are going, there's no way people are going to, you are going to build alliances with other kind of people. That's
Yeah, I like this point about like having a common enemy, but I think that because also I was wondering then, like, what if you actually win the fight with for example the Amazon warehouses campaign, then how are you gonna proceed with this like alliances? And I was thinking more that the common enemy might be actually something bigger than Amazon, even though Amazon is the perfect symbol of actually capitalism. And I heard from our friends who are in this movement called Universities for Climate, who are doing like strikes in their universities, which I found really awesome. That they were saying, yeah, but some people in the regions are even more anti-capitalist than we are. Only they don't call it this way, but the reason why they're, for example, scared why they would vote far right parties who will give them some, you know, promise that the world's gonna be like normal and understandable and less complex and more predictable, is actually that the people already living in so complicated system that is very unpredictable, and that you have to work really hard to even afford the rent and all these kind of things, that maybe it's good to actually come to the people and try to search for the common fears we have, or for the common things we disagree with, and focus rather on these like very elemental values, or like life, like most important topics, and then actually realize that maybe we really just mean the very same ideas, but we just call them very different worlds, and then maybe just try to focus on this rather than to actually think of like, who are these people voting for, what are their opinions on, I don't know, something that is actually not really like happening right now. So maybe we can only talk about it later, and then maybe by the time the people can a bit open their eyes by meeting also some other like people, different opinions, different values. And yeah, it's a bit abstract, but I hope you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's very clear to me. Sammy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I that's what I was, along the lines of what I was thinking as well, in terms of how I would think about going about strategic organizing or strategic alliance building, as I understand us talking about it at the moment. Yeah, and I can appreciate groups that maybe don't want to say strongly that they're anti-capitalist, so that they can still engage with people who have not identified that themselves. I think that's a smart tactic. Being clear on your values yourself, definitely a smart tactic. I won't say that we, or the groups that I'm organizing with, are necessarily making such strategic alliances outside of the anti-racist work at the moment. I don't see us making alliances with people who have any sort of racist indentations at the moment. But we are trying to build alliances with folks that are doing similar work, you know, and like especially in the South and in frontline communities, to see how we can support them, acknowledging the privileges that we have from organizing from Germany and from Berlin. So that's more of the sort of strategic or alliance building that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Such great points in all of that. Perhaps also, I'm also taking a look at the time and thinking about how we begin to wrap up this conversation that I think can go so many different ways. I have one question that I still really want to ask, but I'm going to ask it just because, you know, I'm the moderator here, so I have power. But I have one perhaps final question before we start to wrap up around something that I think people touched on in different ways. But for me, it's related to this concept of time poverty. So the fact that like there are some people who, because of their situation, because of their living conditions, you know, basically they don't have the time to be able to eat better, to be healthy, to go out and like go marching in the streets, to think about, you know, starting a garden, to do all of these things. And so I think Teïssir, earlier you mentioned a little bit on how a lot of people are basically just fighting a daily fight. We're fighting to not get killed on the street. We're fighting to not be fired from our jobs. We're fighting to do that. And for a lot of people, that doesn't leave the time, like literal physical time, to even go and engage with social issues, especially not with environmental issues, which sometimes seem so abstract and in the future. And I'm really curious, how do you see in your own work, do you see this thing of time poverty coming up, which I think you've mentioned a little bit, and what do you do with that? How do you make choices on what to do when you're faced with limited time, but with issues that are really pressing and urgent and current?
It's a good question. Actually, we are still chatting. I mean, we're just struggling with that. The thing that we're trying to do is obviously to have our meetings with, you know, our monthly meetings after work, actually. So never any decision is made during the day because people are working, and we are an organization with only volunteers, as I said. So it's obvious that we need to have our meetings during the evening. But yeah, I think being an activist and taking time to fight and taking time to, you know, be on the field and fight, I feel personally that it's kind of a privilege, you know, because you have the time to do it and people are just struggling. I mean, if I can do it, it's only because my family has been taking care of me while I was, you know, unemployed and just, you know, searching for my life and my perspective and what I'm going to do with my life, because I had the time to do it, because I had a family doing, you know, working and support me actually. So it's really difficult, and I don't know how to answer that, to be honest, but I know that we have a lot of people in our movement who are working and it's really difficult for them, but you know, they just have this need to be in the movement and to be active in it, and just they are struggling with that, and they just making time to be part of the movement. And it's really hard sometimes, but especially during the COVID crisis. But yeah, I don't know, it's really difficult, and I'm just really happy to be able to do it, and it's important to say.
I don't know if that question was open to everyone, but the first thing that came to my mind though was what does it mean to engage then? Because even if someone's doing the tiniest little change in their weekly schedule or their daily schedule, like that is enough for some people, and that should be enough for some people, because the reality is that climate crisis is going to impact the people that do suffer most from time. What did you call it? Time.
Yeah, it's like time poverty.
Time poverty, or poverty in general, right? So like these communities are going to face it. And yes, definitely having the time to be an activist in the sense of like going out on the streets or doing direct actions, you need more time, right? But we all can be activists in different ways, and that should be super valued just as much as anything else. There's so many different ways to be an activist. And so, yeah, I want to see groups and organizations supporting more people who are just doing everyday things, because there are so many amazing groups and individuals out there doing things. Another really good point brought up in that podcast today was how the climate movement focuses so much on emissions and like talking about how much emissions we have and this and that and numbers. But those emissions ultimately change the climate and impacts communities who are struggling with all these other things. So if you focus just on those people and those communities and what they need, no matter whether it connects with climate or not, it eventually will, and you'll be uplifting them in so many ways that you will be addressing the climate crisis as well. So I just think human-centered, people-centered support, especially from big organizations like Greenpeace or international development stuff, if you're not actually talking to people about what they need, and then starting there, then it's probably not going to be worthwhile. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know like what to add. I mean, definitely the movements should be like more inclusive towards people who don't have so much time, but it's definitely valuable to actually hear from somebody like what are their needs, or what is the thing they're missing, or how the future should actually, or the utopia, or like what we actually want to achieve by the social change, what it should look like according to people who, for example, don't have time. And yeah, there's also wonderful examples of young mothers and fathers all around the world who are now like actually becoming really active, because even though these are the people who actually, I mean, don't have time, because if you have a small kid, it's like you just don't have time for anything. And even these people are now like organizing in beautiful ways. So yeah, I think that's really valuable to also like get more voices and just like try to offer the space for all the people the same, even though they are not like the core activists or something. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for all of those points. And I think to add also that it is definitely it's a privilege to be able to do activism, but ideally if we do our activism and organizing right, and we build those alternatives that all three of you have talked about, ideally those alternatives would be what provide us more time, right? More leisure, more time to build community, to have connection, to eat good food, and to do all of those things. So yeah, thank you so much for all of your comments. And I think we do have to start wrapping it up now. I would just love to have the three of you here for the whole evening. But to wrap it up, I think kind of a final question / call to action. If the three of you could maybe shortly say, what do you think that people, especially the folks who are watching this, the folks over at Greenpeace, like, you know, the entire network of what is Greenpeace, how can they support, uplift, engage with the work that you've shared, and also what you think should be happening going forward with this particular campaign? It's a big question, I know, I'm sorry.
Who wants to go first?
Sammy, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I will try. I think I said a bit last time I spoke about what I hope these big organizations can do, but yeah, I mean, I think amplifying voices of people who are already doing so much of this work is really important. Making sure that if you have access to these big funds, that it's actually going to people on the front lines, people in communities where it will do the most impact. I mean, in terms of food, I just hope people can think about who's doing what in your communities and connect with them and see how you can support them or make some sort of change that seems comfortable to you. I mean, just doing one little thing is great. So yeah, that's like on individuals level, but there's definitely groups around you that are working to change certain systems, and maybe just connecting with them and seeing what their work is the first step. Yeah, I think I've said it already. So, but thank you so much. It was so lovely to be part of this. Thank you to Talissa for your moderation.
Yeah, I can go then. I think maybe just for the people watching, it's so important to avoid making people feel guilty about the way they are living their life, especially poor people who are just don't have any other choice, you know, just about plastic and recycling and all those stuff, and just take accountable the real polluters there. And maybe the other thing is what we are really trying to do at Alternatiba is trying to avoid, you know, this kind of paternalistic approach, a paternalistic way, when you just, you know, go to see people organizing themselves and they ask you for help, and you can't come and say, this is how things should be done, this is how you should fight. You know, you just, you know, you have to be conscious about the fact that you are here to support, to give strength, and to shed light into other people's fights. And I'm saying that also for Greenpeace, but the other thing is maybe to trying to, it's really hard, really difficult to do that, but it's trying to, you know, speak in a more positive way, to build a more positive narrative and just fight for something and not against something. And I just realized saying that I didn't do that during this whole webinar, but, you know, it's really difficult to do. But I think organizations like Greenpeace can really, you know, make people see society differently. And we need that, especially small organization like us.
Yeah, I was just thinking during what you two were saying that is there anything I could even add? And yeah, maybe just like one thing, and that's that we should also really care about ourselves and about our relationship. And even though it's like a so important fight that already endangers like so many lives, all the social inequalities and the climate change, but still we have to think about to have actually some rest and to actually, think about ourselves and just not burn out, because then we can't help to anybody else anymore. So yeah, I think now it's all said.
So important.
So many nods. I know we're all just like.
Yeah, this super great points. And thank you all again so much, both for sharing your wisdom here with us and for all the work that you are doing on the ground every single day. Yeah, the movement, and I say the broad movement, wouldn't be what it is without the three of you and so many more people. But thank you so much for sharing with us. And on that note, I think we're gonna wrap up today. At the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that we were going to have an audio transcription, which will be made available after the webinar itself. I apologize if we didn't get to answer your questions. I tried to weave in some of the questions from the audience, but apologies if we didn't get to your question today. But since this is the first of 2 webinars, maybe we'll get to some more questions again on the 21st when we have the second of our series. Or maybe there are questions that you and your colleagues, your neighbors, your roommates can talk about, take these discussions home with you. So we hope that this was inspiring and fruitful. I know I learned a lot. So thank you again to our 3 amazing panelists, Sammy, Teïssir, and Veronika, as well as thank you to everyone in our Greenpeace team who's working behind the scenes, getting our live stream going, running our chat, doing all that good stuff. And of course, thank you to everyone watching, everyone at home, and all of the organizers and activists and artists and educators and cooks and all of the amazing people who keep our movement going. Thank you all so much. And we hope to see you on the 21st. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.